Hello, I'm Steve Golightly, the Principal Sustainability Officer at Lincolnshire County Council, and I'd like to welcome you today to the webinar on Sustainable Businesses Part 1. The aim of this and other webinars being presented over this week is to help businesses reduce their carbon emissions and associated energy costs. The huge rise in gas prices seen over the last few days means it's ever more pertinent that businesses become as efficient as possible. Today we have 4 speakers: Richard Tidman from IES, who will talk about computational thermal models and digital twins; Stuart Fox from Fox Electrical, who will talk about LED lighting, heating and ventilation; Richard Jones from Amelia Solar and EV Camel will talk about solar PV and EV charging; and Dan Eagleton from Procure Direct, who will talk about LED lighting and far infrared heating. After the presentations, there'll be a question and answer session where you can pose questions to our 4 panelists. We'll hopefully be able to provide answers. The webinar is being recorded and will be available at the County Council's Green Master Plan website, www.lincolnshire.gov.uk/green-masterplan. I'd now like to introduce our first presenter, Richard Tidman from IES.
Thanks for the intro there, Steve. Okay, I'm fairly conscious on time. We've only got a 15-minute presentation, so I shall make this no longer than it need be. So I'm from IES, which stands for Integrated Environmental Solutions. My presentation is on computational thermal models and digital twins. I will also be looking at the broader dynamics that are going on at the moment in the energy markets. So if you should need to contact me, these are my contact details at IES. I'm the Business Development Manager for the UK. And I'm going to just ask 3 basic questions within this presentation. What is the challenge? Why is this a problem? And how can we respond? So if we take a look at the challenge is our UK legally mandated target to become a zero carbon economy by 2050. That includes a target to cut UK CO2 emissions by 78% by 2035. This amounts to approximately a 60% reduction compared to today's emission levels. And the legislation is starting to be felt in planning policy and emerging building regulations policy and that type of thing now. So it's something that's going to form quite a prominent feature as we move forward towards 2050. So if we look at why this is a problem, if we take a look at the UK energy mix at the moment, this is a graph from 2017 to 2018. So we have the months January to December along the bottom, and we have energy generation capacity in terms of gigawatts per hour up the y-axis there. So we see that coal is predominantly brought in during the winter season. We also use some biomass that's run through coal-fired plants as well. A fairly consistent level of nuclear generation throughout the year. Small amount of pumped storage and hydro, and then a good proportion of combined cycle gas turbine generation in blue there. And ICTs, these are the international connection terminals, and that brings in electricity from Ireland and the continent. Wind generation and solar. So this is the UK electrical mix. It's not changed tremendously since 2017, and you can see that it's fairly consistent throughout the year. There is a lull during the summer and it tends to peak in the winter, but it's fairly consistent. The issues that we're seeing at the moment with gas prices is due to one of these ICTs, that the French connection has gone down, and that's meaning that we need to draw more gas to supplement that loss. Now, if we now look at how this compares to natural piped gas for the use in gas boilers and oil heating, you can see that this is substantially larger, especially during the winter. So it's a 2 or 3 times greater magnitude of gas that we use. So you can see from this gas just graph just how dependent we are on natural gas for the UK's energy needs, particularly in the winter. Use a lot of gas directly for space heating and hot water, and also for electricity generation. So this is a really big challenge as to how we move away from this as a fuel source and utilise renewables more extensively. So you can see that the general curve is something like that throughout the year. It's also important to note that these are 24 average data. It doesn't account for some of the peaks and troughs that we see on a 24-hour basis, which we'll discuss a bit more later. So if we take a look at January, you can see that the large proportion of our energy is from direct pipe natural gas usage. That accounts for about 70%. Only about 3.5% during this period of the year is from solar and wind. That the remainder is made up by gas-fired power stations, nuclear and coal, and so on. So it's very, very evident from this that we only have this portion of energy available from renewables, but we have an energy demand which is much, much greater. So we'd need to upscale our solar PV capacity by about 333 times in order to fully satisfy our current energy demands during January, or we'd need 31 times more wind turbines to do the same thing. So you can see that this is probably going to be technically and economically challenging, and a reduction in the overall energy demand will be required if we're going to try and squeeze this much demand into this much renewable generation. So if we come back to our graph again, and we'll just draw a line across what the UK energy demand looks like. So we have our axis down the side here. We can see that it sort of tops out at these are 7-day running mean averages. So it's evening out these fluctuations, so what, but these sort of top out at about 180 gigawatts per hour. Up the right hand side there, we have a separate axis which tops out at 1.2 gigawatts per hour. So it's a much smaller scale. But the purpose of this graph is to just give you an idea of seasonal variation in our renewable generation capacity. If we look at the grey line here, this is our wind generation. You can see just how erratic it is throughout the year. It is generally higher through the winter, which is more sympathetic to the UK energy demand profile, but you can see it's still very, very choppy. If we then look at the solar generation, you can see that we're only generating about 2.5 gigawatts per hour, sort of max. We can also see that it's broadly disproportional to the energy demand profile. So we produce the most amount of solar power during the time of year when we use the least energy, and the least amount of solar power when we need the most. So in short, it generates power at the wrong time of year. So solar in itself won't be a single solution to the challenges that we face. So one of the offerings that we do have is heat pumps, but obviously that will add a lot of additional energy demand to the grid. So I've done some modelling on what that would look like, and if we look at the peak gas and oil demand throughout the year, it looks something like this dark grey line here. If we were to swap out all of our gas and oil boilers and replace them with heat pumps, we've ended up with an additional energy demand that looks something like this. So it would need 2.5–3 times more electrical generation during the winter, and also would need to generate that renewably. So you can see that the real big challenge is how we deal with this problem during the winter. Wind is another option. We've been the Climate Change Commission has suggested that we should upscale offshore wind capacity significantly. But what we end up in these situations is we end up with large gluts of wind generation capacity when it's windy, and then during other periods when it's quiet, like here, we don't have enough capacity to meet demand. So what we really need is to accompany additional wind generation with some means of energy storage, so that we can ride out these deficits in energy demand from heat pumps. So again, within itself, it's certainly not an easy technological challenge. So I think in short, what these graphs tell us is that the performance standards of new and existing buildings will really need to rise over coming years, but particularly we'll need to reduce the amount of energy that they use, particularly during the winter. It's simply not viable to just keep on adding more and more renewables to the mix. We need to reduce the amount of energy that we use. And that this also has impacts on, more political issues like growth. Should we continue growing, or should we address the energy demands that we already have? It will increase the capital cost of new builds and refurbs through insulation and air tightness and all these sort of things. And there's also a big increased risk of underperformance with these types of buildings. There's been a lot of these supposedly low energy buildings which have gone up, which have got all sorts of problems, that they use more energy than they expected to, overheating problems, poor air quality, and so on. So where our software comes in is to ensure that the performance of the building in practice actually aligns with the design intent. And that's not a simple process. It's quite a complex process to understand how a building will operate before it's actually in operation. So what we provide is a suite of software. We have some software called the virtual environment, which allows us to model buildings at the pre-construction stage and get a good understanding of how they'll operate in practice. We also have our intelligent communities lifecycle modeling, which is more for large scale campuses and cities, that type of thing, to understand how collections of buildings might operate in unison. We can also look at post-occupancy behaviour by pulling out data from BMS systems, that type of thing. And we also have a consultancy service which uses this software to aid our clients in delivering these low and zero carbon buildings. So I think that's about it from me, but so I can pick up any of your questions in the Q&A. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. That's very informative. I'd like to introduce our second presenter, Stuart Fox from Fox Electrical.
Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody is well. Firstly, I'd just like to thank Steve. I just need to get my 1 second. Okay, can everyone see the screen okay? I'd like to thank Steve and Ellen for giving me the opportunity to present our business. Just 1 moment. So our business is electrical wholesale. I've been in it pretty much since I left school, working for others and subsequently working for myself. And within that remit, we've got involved in lots of electrical products over the time, unsurprisingly. So that's just a little bit of a brief history for me now. So we're just in our 16th year of trading. And some of the things we've got involved with are all those things there in terms of designs. Electrical contractors would often ask us to do designs and help them with advice in all these areas, and more so over recent years in terms of saving energy through LED lighting, heating, all sorts. And as Steve said earlier, with the advent of the information on gas we've now got, then gas also is becoming less appealing to people, and I'm sure electrical heating is going to become more popular. So all those things there, we're able to offer a solution on either via our own designs or via a number of our suppliers. So lighting. Firstly, we are qualified LIF lighting design engineers. So as well as doing energy surveys, we're able to offer a service of designs as well. But here's our first example, a company we've recently dealt with called Inspire, which is an office space in Lincoln, and they asked us to come in and save them energy on their lighting whilst improving the atmosphere of lighting for the staff in the premises as well. So there's a few photos that are completed. This was a fairly simplistic one as these things go. So the next slide shows the first thing we went in to do was we go in and we survey what the existing light fittings are, and down the left hand side there, that shows the quantities of those light fittings. and the circuit watts. Now, circuit watts of a light fitting basically is the amount of watts that it uses, which seems obvious, but most light fittings will have losses through their control gate, even LEDs. So the actual circuit watts is different to what the watts of the number of tubes might have been in an old fluorescent fitting. So in the case of that one there, that's a standard sort of 600 by 600 mod, it's 90 circuit watts. The total usage there, as you can see, is 21,780. And on the right-hand side is our suggested solution in terms of the type of light fittings that the client wanted and the savings in electricity on the bottom right, as you can see there. So it's quite a significant saving. We also incorporated emergency lighting into this design as part of the design. Sometimes that can be necessary and other times not. So I'll then take you on to our payback sheet. So those two numbers there from the previous sheet, 21,780 was the original circuit watts, a total of the light fittings, and on the right hand side is the savings that can be made. Now, the way we do our calculations is really fairly simple. So it's the hours per day, days per week, days per year, and overall hours per annum. Now, a few things to consider within this. We keep this simplified. We don't allow for any level of occupancy, as in sensors in loos and little rooms like that. And we don't allow for daylight sensors unless the client specifically asks us to. It does simplify the calculation, as you can see from this sheet. We know that savings will be made with PIRs in situ, and certainly if you're able to gain daylight in a particular building, then that will make a massive difference to these figures. But in this case, these figures, we haven't allowed for them because we know that that will make these figures better than they actually are. So you can see there that the annual consumption previously in kilowatt hours is sort of 56 and across there to 19. So it's quite a significant difference. So all we need from a client really is their hours per running and the unit rate of electricity, which in this case is 13.5p. So your electricity cost there, tons of CO2 produced, and at the bottom, that's the proposed new product cost. Now that can include install or not. Ultimately, we're a wholesaler, so we don't normally do the install, but we have customers of ours that do installs, or sometimes the client might want to do their own install. So on the right-hand side, I guess the key figures, the annual saving in this particular case, over £5,000, and saving in CO2 just over 16 tonnes. So, and we've got the return on investment at 2.75 years on this particular project. However, the fittings the client chose were not necessarily the cheapest fittings, so that would come down. And obviously, as time goes on, the unit rates of electricity are going to come up. But that's our estimated saving time on that particular project. So we've also recently done a job at Pennell's Garden Centre. I can't go through all the spreadsheet because there's unfortunately not enough time, but you can see here the savings more significant. The product cost just over £30,000. And the return on investment only 1.46 years. Now, in Pennell's, there was a number of different fittings in a number of different areas, all sorts of different fittings. So we can source a solution for fittings from all sorts of different suppliers, whether they be UK based or abroad. So that's really just to give you on that one, a significant saving there. As you can see, over nearly £21,000 and nearly 70,000 tonnes. So for Pennell's, that was a significant saving for them. So we also get involved in projects for churches and factories and all sorts. Now, I haven't had a chance to get an example of a factory, but we have done quite a few factories as well as these other jobs. So the jobs are a mixed bag of all sorts of different kinds of companies and the home as well. So that's Pennell's. So I've done a bit of a lighting glossary here. If you're looking to change your lighting, whether it's from ourselves or other companies, then I've done some key points that you should always need to consider, and we're always here to answer questions if you need any help. I can't go through all the technical aspects of these today, but say the help is there should you need it. All these issues, CRI, colour temperature, they're all important things to know when you're looking to change your lighting. Glare was the thing we had to consider for Inspire, because they they were concerned about their staff getting glare. So it's not just about changing fittings, it's about making sure the atmosphere is right in the area as well. Emergency lighting, a key part of lighting. You'd be surprised how many places are not up to standard on emergency lighting. A lot of places you'd expect to be that aren't. So we are able to offer that as a service, and whilst that's not necessarily energy saving, in fact it perhaps can be now, because some of the fittings are much more efficient and they cover wider areas. So that's something else to consider within any design for emergency lighting, particularly in commercial premises. There are some key points. They're by no means them all. Lighting industry is a difficult industry to be in, even when you know about it, because there are lots of different companies out there that might put out information that's not always strictly correct. So we can always help you with that if you're unsure. Here's a couple of images. We actually do designs as well. This is an image of a cafe that we did. So we're able to offer 3D imagery when we do our lighting designs for any client. The lighting design service is a free service. So there's an exterior one here, which this was the Bishop's Palace in Lincoln. It just gives the client an idea of how a lighting project may look when it's finished. And this can be offered on the survey jobs as well as on the standard designs. That's just a couple of little slides to give that information. We'll go on to electric heating. Well, I think if there's a good day to go through electric heating, it's probably today. So I don't know if anyone's heard of Lot 20, but Lot 20 was an EU regulation that was brought in January 2018, which, to sort of overview it, instructed the companies to make their electrical heaters as efficient as they possibly can. And I think they've all followed suit fairly rapidly with that, both UK suppliers and from around the world as well. So they certainly made them much more economical. They convert the heat better into electricity better into heat. Again, we can give you further details there, but if you've not heard of Lot 20, that sort of started a couple of years ago, and it is carrying on post-Brexit. So benefits: electric heating, near 100% efficient, first and foremost. Cheaper, more convenient to install than a gas central heating system. Cheaper to maintain than a gas central heating system. Again, I've embellished some of these points, but these are key points to consider about electric heating. I think most importantly, it's noise free, produces no carbon emissions, and of course, when powered by electricity generated from renewable resources, it's got to be the way forward, really and truly, for heating. So a few key points on electric radiators: they can be controlled excellently now, so to decimal points on thermostats, by Alexa, by Bluetooth, by Wi-Fi. So you can localize control, you can control from away, from abroad, from anywhere really in the world. So electric heaters can be controlled much better than a gas central heating system. I think that there's absolutely no doubt about that. And ultimately, electric hopefully won't be, it's not a fossil fuel, and it's going to be more and more renewable resource. So electric heating perhaps had a worse bad press than it should have, but there are lots of good points from electric heating without a shadow of doubt. So some examples here of types of electric heaters in a domestic situation now. They can be ordinary panel type. They can be, as this one here is, this can have prints on it. It can be mirrored. So they can also look aesthetically really nice. One of our suppliers, Hyson, they've provided a spreadsheet there in terms of cost savings versus other forms of heating. Again, I apologize, I can't go through all the details, but again, we can go through this at another time. So it's just to give you an overview there of kind of savings that can be made. All sorts of different kind of heaters can now be sourced for all different kinds of applications. You see there, a village hall, an auditorium. So, and they can be quite aesthetically pleasing. So underfloor heating is something that perhaps people wouldn't consider for electrical heating, but it is very, very good, particularly for retrofits. Obviously, there's no heaters on the wall. You're getting heated from the floor, so it's going through you. In my opinion, a much better heat source than other forms of electrical heating, because you're not getting all the source from one heat on the wall. And it is pretty efficient now. Again, if it's set right, it's really good, particularly in smaller rooms and retrofits. But it can be set up, it can be designed, in the right way, both for domestic and commercial situations. So I think it's something people should consider more and more these days. And there's a few cost ideas there from one of our suppliers, Heatmat, in terms of the benefits of underfloor heating. And there's just one or two examples there of the types of electric heating that can be sorted. Underfloor heating can, of course, be used under tiles, under carpet, under laminate, pretty much any kind of floor covering. So I just wanted to conclude with something that's probably not that well known, I don't think, in all areas in this industry, but heat recovery. Briefly, heat recovery removes warm, stale air from a room or rooms and replaces it with cool, but with fresh air from the outside. Now, this fresh air is warmed by the air that is extracted out of the rooms. So when it comes back into the rooms, it's at the temperature of the room. So there are quite a few benefits to this in terms of certainly in terms of the air being cleaner. I think that the example there shows the sort of basic as in terms of how it is. You've got one vent in and one vent out. So something that probably is not that well known, but again, designs can be done, advice can be given, and the benefits are shown there in terms of potential energy saving, because the heating is able to flow much more easily, and of course it's clearing some horrible bugs and whatever out of the air. So the heat recovery is again something, particularly in a new build, that I think should become more and more prevalent. It's going to help with the overall savings without any shadow of doubt, and should reduce energy costs. So I apologise for sort of going through this all a little bit quickly, but I just want to try and get our key points across from the things that we do. So finally, that's us. We've got a showroom in Lincoln, so you can see some products in situ in terms of lighting and heating. They're available. Get good advice from our guys. We're contactable in a number of areas on social media, etc., etc. Appreciate your time for listening, and look forward to any questions in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that, Stuart. That's very comprehensive. I'd like to introduce our third presenter, Richard Jones from Amelia Solar and EV Camel. And Richard and Dan were a little bit forward in time, so if you want to spend an extra couple of minutes on your presentations each, that's absolutely fine.
Great, thank you very much, Steve. I'm just going to share my screen and we'll be away. So I'm going to concentrate talking this morning a little bit about solar PV. And what I thought might be interesting would be to take you through some of the practicalities of how we approach designing solar PV to suit businesses really. So what we're finding these days is that people are now quite familiar with solar panels, and they've even heard of the kind of things that you can do with your home to provide a kind of a smart solution, whether that's things like battery storage, heating or immersion heater from the solar panels, just monitoring of systems and so forth. Things are getting quite high tech in the world of energy management, and I think a lot of people have got an inkling of what that's all about. But how does that apply to business? I thought I'd just share with you an example from a school to start off with, which shows perhaps where a school or a business might end up.
So today we're in Corby at the Kingswood Secondary Academy, part of the Greenwood Academies Trust, where we've just completed the installation of a 216 kilowatt solar PV system. The system consists of 476 of the latest technology solar panels from JA Solar, along with two 82.8 kilowatt inverters from SolarEdge, along with 236 optimizers. This system will generate over 180 megawatt hours of electricity each year, which will reduce this school's bills by about 22% each year. And come term time, we'll be back talking to the students at the school here about how the solar system works and how it's relevant to things like maths, physics, and business studies.
Okay, so that's where we might end up. What I'm going to run through now is, well, how do we get to that end stage of a lovely solar panel installation, or not, as the case may be. So, as with anything in life, the most important thing is really to understand what the objectives are. And for businesses, that can be a variety of things. Obviously, it could be as simple as just looking at cost reduction. Sometimes it's about attracting a grant, and there are some grants available in certain parts of the UK for solar PV. In many cases, it's now about carbon savings as well. And alongside that, the environmental credentials. You know, we're seeing a lot of companies saying there's pressure in their supply chain to actually demonstrate that they are addressing our climate emergency. Importantly, we always start with looking at, well, what is the current electricity consumption? Looking at the half-hourly data. For those of you not familiar with that, that is basically a giant spreadsheet, really, showing every half hour of a 24-hour day, and then with all of the days in the year down the left-hand side. And this tells us exactly how much electricity is used in a property every half an hour in a year. And that gives us a baseline for understanding how electricity is used in that business. But it's also important to recognize, well, how might that change in the future? You know, there may be other things that that the business is doing, introducing LED lighting. You know, that can save, you know, quite often a substantial proportion of the amount of electricity that a business is using. Is their business changing? Are they about to introduce EV charging for their customers or their staff members? So there's quite a lot of things that need to be considered rather than just looking at the raw half-hourly data. We can then adjust that to then sort of have a clear picture of what the consumption would be like going forward. We need to have a look at their costs, obviously, and how the costs might change in the future. Do we factor in cost increases to the price of electricity? We then get into our design process, and this is something that now we have the technology to make very accurate, really. And I'm going to show you how we go about doing that. So it's important that, and what we're able to do really is to match the system size to consumption. One of the great things about solar systems is that you can make them bigger or smaller, one panel at a time. And so with that consumption, we know if we put panels on a roof in a certain orientation, we know typically in a year, how much electricity that will generate. So we know we can size a system to say, right, well, with your electricity consumption, the ideal size system might be 50 kilowatts, 100 kilowatts, a megawatt, whatever it might actually be that suits that business and gives them the best payback, and to make sure that they actually use the electricity that is generated. So we look at the time of day of usage against the generation, as well as considering all the little things necessary to optimize performance. You know, quite often we look at orientating panels in different directions so that we spread the amount of electricity that's generated across the day. So I'm going to show you now how we go about doing this for a school. If you just bear with me, I'm just going to share a different screen. So this shows, hopefully is visible, the layout of panels on a particular roof. This is a school in Nottingham, as it happens. We can see here that this is our design result, showing that we're installing 500 odd panels, and that will give us an output of 235 peak. So the interesting thing comes here, and this is where we can adjust our modeling. So this basically comes as a result of analyzing the half-hourly data. So we can see on the left-hand side here that this system would be producing about 200 megawatt hours a year, and that with this size system, we're going to use about 80% of that. And then on the right-hand side here, it shows how that actually affects the amount of electricity that that organization will buy. So in pink, we can see that that school uses 680 odd megawatt hours of electricity a year. And the impact of installing these solar panels will be such that their bills are reduced by about 24%. The amount of electricity they buy will reduce by 24%. So it will have a significant impact on their bills. And that is a reasonably accurate picture. And I'll show you in a few moments how we can actually demonstrate and be accountable for that performance. So if you just bear with me while I go back to the other screen. So we want to be robust in terms of making sure that what is installed is doing the job that it's meant to do. So we can monitor exactly how much electricity has been installed, how much is generated each year. And that monitoring can be down to the level of the performance of each individual panel. By doing this, we can actually enhance the performance of the system. So the monitoring system that I'm going to show you will demonstrate how we can extract the most performance from each individual panel by installing optimizers, which as I say, get the most performance out of every panel. The systems that we install have enhanced safety. One of the issues with solar panels over the years has been the fact that there's very high voltage created between the panels and in the cabling that comes from the panels down into the building, where it's converted to AC electricity. The systems that we install are such that when the system is turned off for maintenance or in the event of an emergency, the optimizers reduce the DC voltage down to a touch safe level. And that is obviously a good thing to have in the event of an emergency in particular. Another key feature is the fact that with this level of monitoring, we can identify exactly where issues in the system may be. It's unrealistic to assume that over a 25-year period, there won't be issues. Maybe nothing to do with the quality of product. It may be to do with, I don't know, birds nesting under a panel or mice or something nibbling away at the cables. But if we can identify where those issues are, then you've got a much more robust system. I think it's also something that when we get into monitoring the amount of electricity that's generated and also monitoring what is being used, that it enables the business to identify further electricity and CO2 savings by having that understanding and having that visibility of the balance between when electricity is generated and when electricity is actually being used. Then it enables further decisions like, is battery storage appropriate or not? The systems we install have long warranties, particularly over a 25-year life. That's of a system, that's quite important. And I think the other thing about solar panels is that because they're there, they're visible to everyone. They really demonstrate a business's sort of contribution to addressing the climate emergency and demonstrate a bit of leadership. So what I'd like to do now is to show you, well, having said all of that, what does that look like in reality for this school that we looked at the design of just now? So the system at this school has been installed for a number of months now, and we can see through here its actual performance. So this is live right now. So we can see that today, right now, it's generating just over 100 kilowatts, and the school is using 130. So there's still a need to buy in a little bit of electricity from the grid. So if we look at the performance so far today, we can see that the school has a base load of about 30 odd kilowatts, and the solar PV kicked in at around about 7 o'clock this morning in order to help that. And then at this section here, we can actually see the performance. Now, this you will see, if you go with numbers and you remember what I showed you previously, this is actually well above the performance. I think it was about 25% of the bills will be reduced by around 25%. But this system was installed at the beginning of June. So far, it's actually, you would expect over the summer for it to contribute a much higher proportion of the school's electricity. But only 9% has been exported. So we can actually be accountable for the design of the systems that are installed. Very quickly, we can also look at the layout of the panels, and we can identify issues. We can see panels that are south facing and how they perform over a period, whether it's over the course of a day or over a longer period of time. We can identify any particular issues that may arise. And we can get down into the visibility of every individual inverter panel. We can see how it's doing, and we can see any issues that may crop up. So we can see here that this inverter is performing well. This inverter is generating 28 kilowatts right now, and we can see that everything is okay. Its optimizers are all connected, and it's connected to the internet. So we've got a lot of visibility. And what I'm hoping by demonstrating this to you is that businesses can actually be reassured that actually install solar panels, the effects of it, it's not a black art, it's actually science, and that science can be verified and we can be accountable for the systems that are installed. But it does take a level of investment, and obviously these systems are a little bit more expensive, generally around 5 to 10% more expensive than a traditional solar PV system. But by being accountable and by having the additional benefits that I've mentioned, then that it's a worthwhile investment. So that brings my demonstration of a practical example to an end, and I'll be pleased to take some questions when we come to it a little bit later. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Again, another very informative and good presentation. I'd like to introduce you to our last presenter, Dan Eagleton from Procure Direct.
Thank you very much, Steve. Let me just set my screen to share. Excellent, thank you. Okay, I just want to thank Steve and Ellen and the council for putting this together first. Obviously, we've got a whole week of webinars in the lead up to the show at the Epic Centre. So thank you for giving me the chance to present to you guys. My name is Dan Eagleton. I'm representing Procure Direct, and I'm going to cover the technologies around LED lighting and far infrared heating for you today. So just a quick run through of what I'm going to cover, talk about a little bit about who we are. I'm going to look at LED lighting. I'm not going to overdo LED lighting. I'm aware that Stuart's covered the technology behind that, but we will just quickly go through some of our range. We're going to look at far infrared heating, and then finally we're going to look at our business premises here in Lincoln, so you can see what that looks like in terms of being an energy efficient premises. So we've been operating since 2005. We specialise in LED lighting and far infrared heating solutions. I guess one of the things that makes us different as a company is that we're uniquely positioned due to our capacity to actually manufacture our own products. So we offer bespoke solutions for customers. If we don't have something off the shelf, then we can manufacture the right solution for you based on your needs. We have a very strong existing client base. We've worked with over 50 schools across Lincolnshire over the last 5 years. We've worked with Lincolnshire Police Force, retrofitting over 32 of their police stations, and we've worked with some big national suppliers. Npower recently completed an installation with Heron Foods, and so on. So LED lighting, like I said, I'm going to go over this fairly quickly. LED lighting, the technology behind it, LED stands for light emitting diode. I'm aware that we use acronyms every day and most people don't know what they stand for. The whole point of LED is to replace conventional types of lighting. So in your businesses, this would be your fluorescent tubes that you would see, and at home, a lot of halogen and compact fluorescent lamps that you would see. LED is available in a massive range of colours. So our more traditional lighting, our old-fashioned lighting that you'd find in your household would generally be what we'd class as quite an artificial light. It's yellow, almost orange in colour sometimes, whereas LED tends to be more a much more natural daylight colour. Colours measured in something called Kelvin, which is basically the temperature rating of the lamp. And this can vary anything from 2500 Kelvin, which is borderline orange, all the way up to 7000 Kelvin, which is borderline blue neon. So traditional lighting tends to be around about the 2700 Kelvin point. LED industry standard is 4000 to 5000 Kelvin, which basically gives you that nice natural daylight. And LED, of course, what it is really known for has been a much longer life type of lamp that offers energy savings, which we'll look at on this slide. So LED itself, in terms of benefits, it's around 65% cheaper to run than traditional lighting. And I think one of the things that gets downplayed massively is how much of an improvement there is to the lighting levels, which you can see in your home and business with LED. It is shown to increase productivity and alertness. And you'll see from some of the slides that I'm going to show you later on product comparison, that it really does make a difference to how an area can look in terms of how dark and dingy it can be compared to a nice bright workspace. And I think there's no doubt that it definitely makes places a nicer place to work when there is a good level of lighting. There are reduced maintenance costs. This is mainly around the fact that LEDs last a lot longer. So you can see from the table at the bottom, the sort of average lifespan that you'd expect out of traditional lighting types. Halogen lamps and CFL lamps being the ones that we generally see in our households, and then the fluorescent lamps or fluorescent tubes, which would be the ones that you would see in your business. And obviously you can see that the industry standard for LED is a lifespan of 35,000 to 50,000 years, which is far greater than anything else. And that's obviously going to save having to have somebody come in, change lamps for you as they fail, and so on and so forth. So a couple of comparison slides just so you can see the difference in light quality. So the picture on the left is from an installation we did about 2 years ago. This is a corridor that we use in 600 by 600 fluorescent module lights, each individual light using 86 watts of power. And on the photo on the left shows what we've basically replaced it with. So this is one of our LED sky panels as part of our Invo range. It's a 33 watt panel. And there's two things here to really draw comparison. One, 33 watts usage compared to 86 watt is obviously a massive reduction in terms of energy costs. But the thing that really stands out from this is the difference in light quality. You really go from quite a dark and dingy environment to something that's very, very well lit. Another example, so this is a school corridor. You don't always replace like for like. Sometimes there are better solutions. This is an extreme example of energy saving, I guess, because in this particular environment, we took down 5-foot fluorescent batten fittings that run at 69 watt each. We could have replaced with battens, but because of the style of the corridor, there wasn't any real benefit to doing it. So we've replaced with our round 2D lights, again, as part of the Invo range. And you can see that they run at just 12 watt. So you've got, a really large saving in energy here. And again, you can see that there is quite a difference in the light quality. With LED, you do have the options for sensors, for motion sensors, for daylight harvesting sensors. So instead of lights just being turned on all the time, each individual light can have its own sensor built into it, meaning that they come on as and when they need to, instead of being lit all day. And then last sort of product comparison is more for the industrial side. So this is an installation that we did at a warehouse for Arco. You can see on the left, basically we took the photo when we'd done half the warehouse, but not the other half. So you can see the photo on the left is their traditional Son high bay lights running at 400 watt each, very artificial in terms of color. and then our Invo LED high bay at 150 watt each on the right hand side. And again, you know, it's not just about energy saving. There obviously is huge energy savings to be had, but the quality of light is very, very different between the two here. So a couple of case studies. I'm not going to lie, I've picked out probably the best 2 case studies that I could. These are large scale projects, and these are best case generally in terms of figures. But you can see the project that we did for Lincolnshire Police, we did back in 2018. We did, I think it was 32 police stations in total. And you can see the return on investment was 1.4 years on that entire project. And they're now enjoying reduced lighting running costs, saving themselves £170,000 per year, which is a significant amount of money. I think you could see from the photos earlier that, you know, the lighting quality increase is substantial. And Heron Foods, we've just finished. We finished in August this year. It's been an 18-month project for us. We've redone 132 of their stores across the UK. And basically the figures on these ones are staggering. Almost £500,000 is now being saved per year in their lighting running costs, and over 1 million kilograms of CO2 being saved annually across all of their sites. And again, there is a huge increase in the quality of lighting. We've done their head office buildings, we've done shop floors, we've done warehouses, back of house areas, etc. And the next slide shows you just what that looks like in terms of light quality. Their stores weren't terribly lit anyway, but you can see that, you know, there is a big difference again in terms of the brightness, but also the color of the light. But the savings that they're going to experience as a company is substantial. Something that doesn't get spoken about that much, the range of external lights that are now available with solar powered. This technology has come on a long way in the last couple of years, certainly as battery management has improved. And it's now a viable option for companies or businesses where external lighting may not have been an option before due to infrastructure costs of having to put trenching in for cabling, etc. LED solar bollards provides an option for that. Fantastic thing about a solar bollard is literally you just, you know, you attach it to the floor, you submerge it into a concrete block and you turn it on, and that is it. There is nothing else in terms of install. They're very easy to maintain. There's very little maintenance with them. Our range that we have, like the photo you can see here, is an installation that went down into a marina down south. That's our anti-vandal VDL 001 bollard, which is basically an IK10 rated vandal proof bollard. We quite often at trade shows will invite people to come and try to smash this bollard with a baseball bat. It's pretty much indestructible. But these bollards operate, as all of our bollards do now, on sensors. So basically they have dusk till dawn sensors built in. They come on automatically as it starts to get dark, and they run at a 30% illumination. And then when motion is detected within 5 meters of the bollard, it will illuminate to 100%, and it will hold that for 30 seconds until no movement is detected. So it really allows for an effective way of lighting and a clever way of managing the energy performance for those bollards. And we do quite a range. They're available in all different colors, sizes, temperatures, etc. We can produce whatever's required. Just a quick slide as well on the external street lighting that's available from ourselves. I think this will be an area that we see a lot more development on over the coming years as it becomes more mainstream. They retrofit, so they're basically just a head unit. They retrofit onto an existing column, and you can see the photo on the left is one of our AOS Pro lights, and the photo in the middle is it lit at night. And then one of our PDPL 008s on the far right hand side to give you an idea of the sort of light that you can get out of these fit-ins. I'm very conscious on time, so where are we? Okay, 5 minutes. So fire infrared heating. So it's important to understand that fire infrared is very different to traditional heating. Sorry, just losing my notes there. Convection heating provides indirect heat by heating the air. Warm air circulates, gradually pushing the cold air down and heating the space over a period of time. Difference being infrared heat is a direct heat that heats people and objects directly. I'll show you a slide on the next screen, which sort of puts that into motion a little bit for you to help understand it. But I think the easiest way to describe far infrared is when you're stood outside and it's cloudy, you don't feel particularly warm. The clouds go, the sun comes out, and you feel that infrared energy coming from the sun, and that is heating you directly, and far infrared does the same sort of thing. So benefits of far infrared, it's up to 30% more efficient than standard convection heating. It reduces moisture in the air and helps reduce allergens as well. And there are scientific studies that show there are quite a few health benefits to using far infrared as opposed to standard convection heating. Very easy to fit. The panels come with a plug on the end of them. They can be hardwired or just plug straight into a 13-amp socket, and there's no maintenance with them. And Stuart at Fox Electrical sort of touched on this earlier. One of the big things that doesn't get spoken about enough is the ability to individually control each panel or each room in a much more efficient way than you can do with traditional boiler-based systems, which just have one thermostat. So it gives you a lot more control in that way. It's a little graphic just to sort of show how it works. So we know that heat, when it comes off radiators, goes up, it pushes the cold air down, which can obviously create drafts throughout the property, and it does circulate the air so that you have dust movement and what have you. Whereas far infrared heating, it heats the objects and the people in the room, and it is a more energy saving solution in the long term, especially as we see gas prices going up. So I guess one of the important things is why we need to look at alternative heating methods. We should all be aware now that the government's pledged to cut carbon emissions by 78% by 2035. Natural gas boilers are seen one of the biggest barriers to achieving this, and they currently produce 58.5 million tonnes of CO2 a year, which is comparable to the amount of CO2 that every single vehicle on our road in the UK emits as well. So there's going to be a big focus on alternative heating methods and moving away from gas central heating systems. Quick run through the heating panels that are on offer. So top left is one of our 600 by 600 heating panels. These are available 600 square or 600 by 1200, and they can be wall mounted or ceiling mounted and will fit into a suspended ceiling grid as well. And then you've got traditional bathroom types, which have got mirrors built into them. It looks like a mirror, but it is actually a heater. You've got underfloor desk heaters, which is the curved freestanding unit that you can see at the bottom. And what we're seeing a massive growth in now and a massive demand in is in the heating panels that have got pictures printed on the front. And you'll see behind me as well, that is a heater that's on the wall behind me with artwork on. And there's obviously no limitations to what can be done there. People are using family photos and all sorts to put on there. So it's a clever way of getting heat into the house without it being intrusive. So a little bit about what we've done as a business. So we're on the Allenby Industrial Estate in Lincoln. We moved into this building last August. It was just a shell when we moved in. And the things that we've sort of done to make our building more energy efficient are that we have LED lighting, far infrared heating and solar panels. You can see from the top left corner, our warehouse is controlled by our Invo high bay lighting that's all on sensors. So they're not on unless somebody is in the warehouse. Usually in a warehouse environment like ours, the lights would get turned on in the morning and turned off at night, but the sensors allow effective use of that light as and when it's needed. The photo in the top right is actually the room that I'm in now. So you can see that we have LED lighting in the ceiling and we have a 600 by 1200 far infrared heating panel as well. And we also have the photo heating panel on the wall. The solar panels we had installed onto our premises were actually done by Richard Jones at Emilio. And what we found is that during the summer months, our electricity bill runs at £8 to £10 a month. You know, we've got kitchen equipment, we've got 6 or 7 computers that are on all day, every day, as well as lighting. We have no natural light in this building, so we have lights on all the time, and our running costs are £8 to £10 a month. And again, another example of what one of these far infrared heaters can look like on a bit of a larger scale with artwork on. So that's pretty much everything from me. Just contact details for ourselves, my mobile number, the office number, if anyone's got any direct questions. We are at the Epic Centre in the showground on the 13th of October for the Lincolnshire Climate Summit. It'd be great if you could come and see us, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much, Dan. Again, another wonderful presentation. It's time for the questions and answers now. Richard Jones, you've got a couple of questions you'd like to ask Richard Tidman, if you'd like to present them now.
Thanks, Richard, I was very interested in the graphs that you were showing earlier, and it was really just a comment, I think, as much as anything, that as we move to more electrification of seemingly everything that we do, EV charging is clearly going to be something that that will have a big impact, and that it's going to be quite difficult to actually estimate what that will be. I suspect it's a lot less than many people think, and it won't be as regular as many people think. You know, that's quite going to be have quite a big impact. And very interested to see that you mentioned sort of battery storage as well, and I think that that's something that we're going to have to consider as businesses and as homeowners, but perhaps not just at domestic or at business level, but also at grid level. And I think we're in the first stages of starting to see that roll forward. Something that's very expensive at the moment. There's huge demand on batteries, obviously, with batteries in cars as well as needed perhaps on the grid and for people's homes. And I just wonder whether you got any other thoughts on that, Richard.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for your question, Richard. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think I don't believe that the additional demand from electric vehicles will be as prominent as you might expect. I think space heating consumes a vast amount of power. A lot of people might have a 30 kilowatt gas boiler in their house, and you know, that's like 30 kettles at least. I think we consume huge amounts of heating our houses, and a lot of it just seeps out the construction fabric. I'm not a specialist by any means in the EV sector, so I don't really know quite how it stacks up proportionally. I think probably one comment that I can make with some safety is that the demand will be relatively consistent year round, unlike the large variation that we have in the current energy demand profile, with space heating obviously forming a large demand during the winter. You've touched on, I think the other issue that we need to think about is local grid network stability as well, and how we deliver on that. So you've got the generation side, and also quite how we get that to vehicles as smart charging and so on is delivered. Then there will be vehicles that discharge at certain points and others that are charging and so on. So that's a big challenge. I think on the storage front, I think that really is the big crux of how we crack this zero carbon challenge. As you saw from a graph, we've only got about 3.5% of generation from solar and PV during January at the moment, and it's not viable to expand solar PV by 300 times. We just haven't got the space and the resources for it. So I think wind is certainly more compatible for the UK energy demand profile, but even with that, we need vast amounts of energy storage to ride out these multi-day fluctuations in demand and supply. And I think that will occur in various different modes. I think there's certainly local means of storage. I don't think it's going to be electrical batteries. I think we should probably sort of steer the conversation more towards storage as such, rather than batteries. I don't think there's enough global resources of cobalt, lithium, and nickel, and all the rest that you need for batteries to realize that. I think it will be more thermal storage by hot water tanks, that type of thing. And then we've got hydrogen and things like that we can look at grid scale. But it will be hugely expensive, and there is no known path as to how we actually implement it at the minute. So it's all very much unknown. Yeah. Does that answer your question or your comments?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, Richard. agree with I think everything you said. I think it is interesting that we're all going to be having big batteries in cars sitting alongside our houses in the next few years, and maybe they can be used for providing or storing off-peak energy to be used in peak times in our homes. But I think the area that you mentioned about heat storage in homes, where there can be perhaps sufficient heat to be able to be stored, whether that's from using off-peak wind electricity, or whether in summer weather, or in the sort of autumn and spring, certainly whether solar PV can have an impact as well. I think it's something that we're not currently seeing, that I think you're absolutely right, that perhaps we're going to need to see more of.
Yeah, I think the other big issue to touch on as well is electric waste, and quite what role batteries play in that, because at the moment, as far as I'm aware, electric batteries, they're not recyclable, and quite what we do with all these waste PV cells and lithium batteries and all the rest of it is kind of a problem for the future. I think a hot water tank with some water that you can just run down the drain is a lot more low impact in terms of when you want to replace the thing. So I think that's something that will increasingly become scrutinized. That's it from me, Steve. If there's any more questions?
We've had a further question. Do you want to put it on the screen, Ellen?
Yeah, I can ask the questions if you want, Steve.
We've had a question on LED lighting. First, I'd like to put to Procure Direct. Have you done any follow-ups to see if they're delivering the savings that they were promised? And if Dan would like to answer that first.
Yeah, of course. It's a valid question. We talk about these massive savings. We do a lot of follow-up work with all of our clients. We tend to, when we get involved in doing an LED lighting project, we tend to get involved in other aspects of their electrical needs as well. So we will do their emergency testing, and we have an ongoing relationship with these people. So in short, we stand by the numbers that we put out there. We do check them. We have regular dialogue with our clients, and I'm sure as Stuart would affirm to as well, those savings are real. Those savings are out there to be had. Yeah, certainly as far as we're concerned as a business, that we do follow up, and those savings are exactly as advertised.
Can I just come in there and add to that, Dan, if I may? I think that one of the things that I just mentioned in passing that's really important is that lots of businesses are considering a multitude of measures. And one of the areas when we work alongside Procure Direct is to analyse that half-hourly data of current consumption, adjust it according to the savings that Procure Direct are projecting in terms of LED or savings from LED lighting. Before then, we look at solar PV and assess what further savings there may be. So it's important to look at things in the round.
Thanks for that, Richard. Stuart, would you like to answer that question as well?
Unmute. Yeah, likewise, as Dan said, particularly on the panels project, which we highlighted in our presentation, part of that project was funded by a grant, I think, from Smart Energy Links, which I'm not sure is necessarily there now. I think it's maybe been disbanded, but they have to produce that information for them as part of the grant ongoing application. So that is monitored all the way through. And quite a few of the factories that we've done over time, and likewise, they have to produce figures for the people who are accountable in buildings as well. So yeah, it's pretty much an ongoing progress. I wouldn't say everyone we've done, we've followed through, and we've a lot of ours are done through third-party electrical contractors, and therefore that they're sort of more responsible in that case. But yeah, there has to be that recourse for everybody to make sure that the savings are being made. So but there's no doubt that there are. So, and there's still lots of places out there that that can make the savings as well. So
Thanks very much, Stuart. We've had another question. Is there an expectation that electricity prices will fall or gas prices rise as the heating demand moves towards electric heating? Did you want to answer that one, Richard Tidman?
I can have a crack. I'm not a energy. I'm more of an energy demand reduction specialist, to say, and IES thermal modeler rather than a someone that can comment, with true accuracy on the state of the cost of the energy grid. I think that it's very difficult to predict, to be honest. There's so many geopolitical issues that come into play with gas that it is quite difficult to say. I think we've enjoyed a period over the last 10 years of really quite cheap gas prices, and that's taken pressure off the need to address energy security and energy poverty, that type of thing. Gas prices have risen significantly since January, in part due to global financial situations, inflation across all sorts of resource sectors. I mean, the cost of lumber that rose significantly this year. So there's a lot of factors to bear in mind. I think broadly, all energy will become more expensive, which will push more efficiency in the sector. As to whether we'll see just a continuation of these rising gas prices and electricity will become proportionately cheaper, I'm not too sure. It's one of the big reasons for the falls in gas that we did see was that the US fracking production allowed for global markets to be a lot more gas to be produced. So I wouldn't like to say with any clear accuracy, to be honest.
Sorry for putting you on the spot there, Richard. Is there anyone else that would like to have a...
I'd just like to make a comment, if that's okay, Steve. I think that the other Richard is absolutely correct. There are lots of broader geopolitical issues and factors in play here. Things that we do know, however, is that the UK government has effectively done a deal with the Chinese government in relation to the financing of the new nuclear power stations that will be coming on stream over the next decade. And the forward purchase price of that electricity is at a substantially higher level than the current wholesale price of electricity. So I think that one way or another, there will have to be a gradual increase in electricity prices over the next year because of those commitments that have been made. So I think certainly that the level of sort of above inflation increases in electricity prices is set to continue one way or another.
I'll just hop back in there again, if you don't mind, Steve, now that I've got my thinking cap on. I think another point to bear in mind is which may slightly counteract Richard Jones's argument, is that as it stands, about 23% of your electricity bill is made up of funding levies, which go towards the replacement of gas boilers, loft insulation, these sort of funded initiatives. And that funding structure arose really around the early noughties, when we were looking to achieve our initial decarbonisation efforts. So we're in a situation now where the government broadly would like people to move across to electricity as a fuel source to help decarbonise the UK, but the tariffs actually disincentivise them to do so. So there is conversation as to how we might restructure that funding such that 23% isn't sitting on your electricity bill. Now, as it stands, I think about 85% of the population uses a gas boiler to heat their home. So it's quite politically unpopular to move those tariffs over to gas. particularly when we've seen these recent wholesale price rises. Now, how we quite fund this, whether it's from central government taxation or whatever else, I'm not too sure. But you would expect that there would be some efforts from government to help incentivise the uptake of infrared panel heaters, heat pumps, and all these electric modes of heating, if that's the direction that they want to take us in.
Thanks so much, Richard. We've had another question on far infrared. Do you get cold spots? How does it work if you're sitting under a desk or behind a piece of furniture? And how does the cost of keeping warm compare with more traditional heating methods that we're familiar with? Dan, if you'd like to have a go at that one first.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Anne, for the question first. It's a good question. There's a few questions in there. So in terms of comparative costs, it generally looking 20 to 30% cheaper running costs compared with traditional heating. That depends a lot on your setup. It depends on how you're controlling each room, if you've got individual room sensors or individual heating sensors, etc. But generally, we're talking 20 to 30%. So what was the what I want to know is, do you get cold spots and how does it work if you're sitting underneath a desk? Okay, so far infrared is a very directional type of heat. It heats what it sees, the same way as the sun would do in that respect if there was cloud barrier. It doesn't heat the air directly like a convection heater would do. So do you get cold spots? If you're sat behind something in between the heat source, i.e. the far infrared panel, and where you are, then yes, you wouldn't get the full benefit of that heat. It does increase the ambient air temperature because the objects in the room are going to absorb that heat that's coming off that panel. But you would have cold spots in that scenario. What the beauty with far infrared heating is that you have full flexibility of where you can install your heating panels. And where you'll find a difference with this type of heating is that your heating panels are going to be installed in the areas where you're going to be sat, basically. So, like, I'll give you an example in our office. Our main office has 4 desks. We have heating panels that are positioned above each desk because that's where people are sat. And it ensures that people are warm. In the middle of the room, it might not be as warm there, but then it doesn't need to be because that's not an area of the office that we need to keep warm. So yeah, it is directional, but you have a much greater level of flexibility in terms of where you place your panels to ensure that that you are warm, as opposed to just, you know, that you're heating something that doesn't need to be heated. It's a weird technology to understand. I guess that we always have the option. You know, we're located down on the Allenby Industrial Estate. Our office is fully infrared heated. If you want to come down and have a look, you know, I'd be quite happy for you to come and see what the heating panels look like, experience what type of heat they give out. And obviously I can answer any questions that you've got face to face. But if you do want to do that, just drop us an email or get in contact with Steve, who can put us in touch. And I'll be quite happy for you to come down and have a look to see how we've got our things set up here.
Stuart, did you want to add anything to that?
I think Dan's pretty much covered that pretty comprehensively. I think, and probably I'm sure Dan will agree, that every individual application has to be looked at in a different way. So for the heating type that you're going to use, each individual application needs to be looked at, whether that be with infrared or other forms of electric heating. So I think that's the most important thing to remember in all this. But yeah, I can only echo what Dan said. Infrared is good in certain circumstances, but it might not also be the answer. I went to look at a project a few months ago to Village Hall, local to Lincoln. In actual fact, it wasn't worth putting any heating in there until they'd sorted their insulation out. You know, once we've done the calcs, well, there's no point in changing what you already have. So like I say, every job is different. But other than that, yeah, absolutely echo what Dan said. So.
And I can echo both Procure Direct and Fox Electrical have installed electric heating panels in our electrically heated schools that have gone from electric storage heaters, and I've sat under both of them, and it's a really, really pleasant heat. It's much different than sitting in a normal convection heating situation. I say it's very, very pleasant, and I know the teachers and the pupils have liked it, and especially the teachers have liked the controllability of being able to turn panels on and off as and when they need to. We have another question. how do we tackle the performance gap between EPC ratings and actual building performance? Richard, Tidman, do you want to have a go at that?
Yeah, kind of a crack at that one. Yeah, it's been quite a long-term on-running issue. This issue of performance gap. For anyone that's not aware, this is the gap between predicted performance and actual performance. I think that it really comes down to undertaking a more thorough assessment. That's the real crux of it. The EPCs that are generated for building at the end of the building regulations process and upon the sale and rental of buildings, it accounts for assumptions in terms of how that building will be used, which are often quite flawed. It also accounts for some very outdated carbon factors. So the carbon factor that it accounts for electricity, for example, is about double what the actual carbon emission carbon factor of the electricity grid is at the moment. So it's a very misleading assessment. They are due to revise the carbon factors at least and a degree of the methodology, but I think it really comes down to an insufficiently detailed assessment process. So how we go about fixing that is really just undertaking a more thorough evaluation, which involves using the type of software that we offer, IES Virtual Environment, and looking at operational energy demand and carbon emissions in much more detail. There are structured schemes which support that, one being the Neighbours scheme, which is a scheme that's been introduced from Australia. That seems to be quite successful in reducing the compliance gap. But I think it really needs more government leadership and pressure from consumers as well to say that the EPC structure that we've got at the minute just isn't delivering value.
Thanks so much, Richard. Is anyone else want to add to that, or? No, I can see that. Right, we've had another question. Will carbon capture and storage play a role in allowing us to move to a low carbon economy? It has been mentioned for several decades, but no one seems to be able to make it pay commercially so far. Would anyone like to take that question? I feel it's down to you again, Richard. Sorry.
Yeah, I did answer this one briefly in the chat. Again, it's not something that I'm hugely knowledgeable around, but I think I'm aware that the Committee on Climate Change have proposed that gas-fired power stations are retained by 2050 and that they should become zero carbon by implementing carbon capture and storage. But as I think it was Craig, wasn't it, as he mentioned, there haven't been any full-scale cost viable options put forward as yet. So one thing that does concern me is that these projections of a zero carbon grid, particularly during the winter, again, are very much on the basis that these emerging untested technologies are actually achieved. And it's quite a big risk as far as I can see. I think the real big crux is we really need to just reduce the amount of energy that we use. And yeah, that's easier said than done. So there's certainly no magic elixir to any of these problems.
We've had another question that I think has probably been answered, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you think the electricity supply will cope with the demands from electric heating, EV charging? I suppose the answer to that at the moment is no, we don't think it will be, but would anyone like to answer that?
I'd be happy to touch on that just to give Richard a break. So I think the key thing with all of this is actually managing when that demand is. Clearly, both of those things will mean that there is more demand. Much of the issues are around the kind of the poor capacity of our grid in certain parts, particularly in parts of Lincolnshire, just as much as the actual generation of electricity itself. But if together we can do things like charge our cars in the middle of the night. If we can store electricity in the middle of the night for use in peak times, then that will assist and get rid of these problems to an extent. And I think that whilst there are a number of the smaller energy providers that are starting to offer time of use pricing, cheaper at night and more expensive in the middle of EastEnders and Coronation Street, whilst we're seeing that to an extent at the moment, it's people like Octopus, others like EDF are following. It's not yet that prevalent in the commercial market, but I think that we will start to see more of those kind of tariffs become available across the piece.
Thanks so much, Richard.
I can hop in there with a bit extra if you like, Steve. If do we have time for?
Yeah, we've still got some few minutes left.
I think Richard Jones is absolutely correct. I think you didn't quite pick it up from my graphs. I didn't have time to quite go into it, but one of the phenomena that we see at the moment is that the gas grid can ramp up by about 150 gigawatts within the space of 2 or 3 hours. So that's about 3 times the capacity of the electrical energy grid. So you tend to get a lull in gas demand during the night, and then it very rapidly ramps up in the morning when people's heating systems become live and they hop in the shower and these sort of things. So it's going to be incredibly difficult to duplicate that with a renewable electricity system. So I think time of use is a really big factor, and storage will certainly play a big role in that. If you can store up power during the night and then draw on it during times of peak load, that's going to be very beneficial. That's on a day-to-day basis. We still have this big problem of using a lot more power during the winter, and I think we really need to try and flatten that demand curve throughout the year, and that's going to be more energy demand reduction measures, particularly on the space heating side. So better insulation, air tightness, all these factors, and just the way that we build and design new buildings, it needs to, the peak heating loads need to be substantially lower. I think that's the way that we crack that one. But in terms of grid scale energy storage, there's a reservoir in Wales, which is used for hydroelectric generation, de Norwig. We need multiple times that capacity, 100, 200 fold that type of energy demand capacity to allow us to absorb wind generation when it's windy and then use it on those less windy days, that type of thing. So it's a big technological challenge.
And there's one final question. I think it's going to come to you again, Richard. We've probably got about a minute to answer it. Are performance standards for new buildings going far enough, and are they being well enough enforced?
The performance standards, no. I think that they're being reasonably well enforced in terms of building control, but at the moment, even the emerging future homes and future building standards, they still put a lot of emphasis on decarbonisation of the electricity grid, and that is based on the assumption that there'll be a lot of these technologies, carbon capture and storage being one, which will be in place by 2050 or 2035 for these early stage reductions. So no, I think it's really been floundering for the last 20 years. We had a good opportunity to have a good crack at it between 2006 and now, but the policy's just been pushed along and it's not been implemented. So we're going to have to pull our finger out, I think, at some point if we're going to hit these targets.
We are indeed. Right, I'd like to thank all the presenters for their time, very informative presentations and very comprehensive answers. The webinar will be available on the County Council's Green Master Plan website. And as I said before, that's www.lincolnshire.gov.uk/green-masterplan. If you have any questions, please contact either the individual presenters themselves or at the County Council on the following email: sustainability@gov.uk. Again, I'd like to thank everybody, and I hope that was an informative presentation for people. And I'd like to again, thank all the presenters for their time and effort. And that, if no one's got anything else to say, then that wraps up this webinar.